Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical theme in Arsenal's 4-1 win over Crystal Palace. So in today's video, first we'll focus on Crystal Palace's shape, then we'll look at Arsenal's 3-2-5 in possession, and lastly we'll focus on Arsenal's right-hand side that did create a lot of issues for Palace in that opening hour. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3 and Crystal Palace in a 4-2-3-1 that shifted into more of a 4-4-2 out of possession. The reason being was that they did have 3v3 in that midfield zone, and there was an onus for Schlupp to press Thomas Partey and Doucouré and Milivojevic dealing with Xhaka and Odegaard. That would force Zaha and Olise to tuck in a bit narrow and deal with the movement of Zinchenko and White. But with Arsenal often shifting into a 3-2-5 with Zinchenko moving into that midfield zone, Olise would tuck in narrow, and that would create a gap for Gabriel to have a bit more time on the ball at the back. Whereas White was very cautious with his positioning due to the threat of Zaha in behind or Zaha in transition. However, the onus for Arsenal was to peg back this Crystal Palace side and have White push forward to peg back Zaha and potentially overload Mitchell. In terms of Arsenal's pressing, they were more cohesive and they ensured that Crystal Palace struggled to build out of the back, with Trossard and Odegaard stepping towards the center backs. You had Saka pushing towards Mitchell, and then it was Thomas Partey and Xhaka stepping forward to ensure that Doucouré and Milivojevic couldn't serve as passing outlets in those midfield zones, with White stepping hard on Zaha, and then with Schlupp free, you would have one of the center backs stepping towards him to ensure that he couldn't get the ball freely beyond the Arsenal midfield bank. With Olise being dragged into more narrow central positions, that did create a gap for Xhaka to drop in towards that zone, but you did see Milivojevic track his movement in towards that area, and there were often times where you had Martinelli checking into deeper positions to get on the ball and drag Ward in towards those deeper areas, and that could create an avenue for Xhaka to make forward vertical runs, but Milivojevic did a very good job of tracking that movement. Nevertheless, Arsenal's 3-2-5 does focus on Martinelli and Saka providing the width and stretching the touchline, and the goal is to get the ball out towards them to get them into 1v1s. Because there wasn't much of a threat on the overlap from Zinchenko, with Milivojevic tracking Xhaka, that did take out an avenue for Arsenal to threaten down that left-hand side, and frankly, a lot of their focus was down the right-hand side, which makes sense. From central areas, Trossard in those early stages was dropping off in towards that midfield zone to create an overload and serve as a passing outlet, and there were times where Doucouré would step towards him if Odegaard was pushing high into that gap between Guéhi and Mitchell, but if that wasn't the case, then you would see Tompkins or Guéhi tracking Trossard's movement in towards that midfield zone to apply pressure. In many scenarios, Trossard was often forced to play safe passes in towards the wider areas or drop it off in towards the midfield, but he did a very good job of ensuring that Arsenal retained possession, despite not having a major threat in that opening half in the final third. Odegaard also struggled to have an impact for large spells on a consistent basis, and you would often have to see him shifting out towards the wider zones to get the ball near the touchline to ensure that Doucouré wouldn't follow him in towards those areas. Arsenal struggled to get the ball in towards Odegaard in between the lines, and on the rare occasion that Odegaard received the ball in that zone, Milivojevic did a very good job of tracking his movement and ensuring that he couldn't have an impact in that zone. Therefore, in terms of Arsenal's right-hand side, the manner in which they were able to get Saka into good positions wasn't getting him into 1v1s. They were able to do that, however, by getting Thomas Partey to drop off a bit deeper away from Schlupp, and then with Zaha in a narrow position near White, Thomas Partey was often able to slide the ball across Zaha into the path of Saka. That was often due to the fact that Odegaard was pegging back Doucouré and forcing him into deeper positions, or simply just ahead of Guéhi and ensuring that Doucouré wouldn't be able to shift over to provide protection. However, from there, when Saka got into 1v1s with Mitchell, that would encourage White to make overlapping runs beyond Zaha to overload the left back, but in those positions they struggled to create chances, and other than that, Saka didn't do a very good job of cutting across Mitchell to get himself into legitimate goal-scoring positions. Essentially, the positioning of Odegaard and Xhaka were pivotal here, and specifically Odegaard in that opening period, as he was capable of occupying both Doucouré and Guéhi, and from there he was was able to manipulate that position to create overloads. There was one example in particular where he dragged Schlupp, and you had Saka dragging Mitchell in towards the penalty area, and from there he's able to slide the ball across Schlupp so Ben White could get in towards the final third in right half space. However, in terms of ensuring that Saka could have a threat in behind, he was sitting in that gap between Doucouré and Guéhi, and from there Saka was hugging the touchline and making runs off of Mitchell in behind, or simply ensuring that White or Thomas Partey could serve as the passer, and from there, whether it be from an inside position or in regards to him making an outside inwards run from the touchline, you could see that Arsenal were at their best when Saka was making those runs off Mitchell in behind the Crystal Palace backline, as he was capable of getting himself into a legitimate goal scoring position or placing teammates in towards those zones to test the goalkeeper. In the build-up to Arsenal's opener, you have Odegaard ahead of Guéhi, and you could see White splitting Mitchell and Doucouré for Saka. Saka turns, and now he's able to drag those two players towards him with the center back, and from here you're expecting him to pull the ball back to Trossard or Odegaard, but he plays it across the box for Martinelli, and Martinelli does a very good job of catching Ward in a poor position, dragging the ball to his left foot, and firing an effort beyond the keeper. In regards to Arsenal's second goal, it's Saka picking up a loose cross that flew through the penalty area, and you could see that he drags out Mitchell and Zaha by pulling the ball back to White. From there, you could see that the positions have changed for Crystal Palace, and it's Mitchell stepping towards White, and Saka now manipulates Zaha's unwillingness to track his movement, and White identifies that threat, and he ends up playing the ball quickly around Mitchell for Saka, who receives the ball freely. Zaha fails to track his movement, and that gives Saka enough time to slide the ball around the keeper before Guéhi could slide in. In regards to the second half, it was clear that Arsenal were focused on remaining in that 3-2-5 with Zinchenko immediately stepping in towards that midfield zone to gain control. And it often caused Crystal Palace a few issues because now Xhaka was pushing a bit higher up the pitch. And if Tompkins wasn't picking him up, Milivojevic was forced to track back, and it formed a back five. And it ensured that Schlupp now had to drop in towards that midfield zone. And it created a 2v1 between Edouard with Thomas Partey and Zinchenko. Trossard continued to drop off deeper to get the ball in pockets of space or ahead of the midfield bank. We saw Odegaard shifting more towards the right-hand side to create overloads against Mitchell, with Zaha being pulled out by White. And ultimately, when you break down Arsenal's third goal, it highlights all the success that they were able to create with that 3-2-5 against Palace. It started with Zinchenko pulling away Schlupp and playing a reverse pass between Olise and Milivojevic for Xhaka in that gap between Tompkins and Ward, and when he does receive that ball in that space, he pulls away the center back, but now with the midfield taken out of the game, he's able to play a first time pass into Trossard, and when Trossard receives the ball, you could see Xhaka and Saka looking to run off Tompkins and Mitchell, and from here he picks out the run of Xhaka off Tompkins, and from there he's able to play a first time effort beyond the keeper before Ward could slide in. So as you could see, Arsenal's persistence to attack within their 3-2-5 proved successful as they targeted Crystal Palace's right side, and in particular the vertical runs in behind presented avenues to create legitimate goal scoring opportunities.